We are talking about AI and the HPCSA guidelines. Presenting this is Tasneem. She's no stranger to any of us because she's been up here today and yesterday. And she's quite involved with our industry. And she is the founder of the Private Practice Growth Club. Tasneem, thank you for that community, by the way, which is part of why we are all here today. Tasneem is actually an occupational therapist, but she has many other dimensions to her as well. Besides being the founder of the Private Practice Growth Club, she's also passionate about developing the mindset and business skills of health and wellness professionals through creation, knowledge-based products, and coaching. She's also passionate about supporting female entrepreneurship. Tasneem, in the audience today, you have a really big bunch of lawyers, which is really, really cool. And today, the rest of today is also going to be quite interesting. So, Tasneem, you're up.
I'm not sure why you told me that, because now you've just like intimidated me a little bit. Can I get hands who the lawyers are in the room? Okay, so I'm just not going to make eye contact with you guys. Good day, everybody. Good morning. It is still morning, right? There's no windows, so you don't know what time of day it is. So we had a talk now. I don't know who was here for the talk before this. So the EM guy. Yeah, okay. So some of you were here for the talk before this on EM guidance, was talking about AI and their practical use of AI. So this session is more broader use of AI because, as we know, I mean, come on, let's be honest. How many of you use ChatGPT on a daily basis? So there are so many AI tools and they are so integrated in our everyday life. We use them for all kinds of things. But as healthcare professionals, we are held to a higher standard of account. In the same way that there's a booklet on social media, which has nothing to do with advertising. It's how you use it in your personal capacity. Everything we do, we have to consider that we carry this weight of the how we represent the health professions, and that it is our duty to not bring the health professions into disrepute. So today we're going to be talking about the HPCSA regulations, but I've got a few disclaimers to make. It would make no sense to do a talk on AI and not use AI. So I have used AI extensively in this presentation. On purpose, I will also point out like where there's certain places where I've used it, and you'll see the difference in where there was human input and where it was just a click of a button and I took it the way it gave it to me, because that's part of what we're going to be discussing today. I'll also be sharing with you a practical. Oh, can I have my clicker? Okay, I'll continue so long. So we're also going to be looking at practical applications. We don't have a lot of time. I did a 6-hour workshop with educational therapists where we went deep dived into how you can, the amazing things. I mean, all of them were like, oh my God, I didn't know you can do that with AI, because if you are only using ChatGPT, let me tell you, your world in AI is really, really small. There is so much you can do with AI. So that's the disclaimer. Oh, thank you very much. So that's the disclaimer. And then, of course, we are going to extensively be going through the HPCSA booklet. Now, I'm not going to be going into reading through. You can go to the HPCSA website and download the booklet and read through it yourself. I'm not going to go into bore you with the details. I'm just going to give you a broad overview and really speak to the practical implications of it. So that's what we're going to be covering today. What is AI, first of all, to understand what AI is, because I think a lot of people think they know what AI is, but they don't really know what it is. Then the professional accountability, ethical considerations, and practical applications. So as I mentioned, I did a 6-hour workshop with educational therapists with the Western Cape Education Department. And before we did the work, while we were doing the workshop, I did a quick poll to ask how many of them were using AI to practice. It was a very small pool of therapists that answered the question. But this is basically what most of them were using. So as you can see, majority were using ChatGPT, and I think that's quite representative of the human population as a whole, that most people are using ChatGPT. Quite a few were using Microsoft Copilot. I think if I had to sample size that with corporate individuals, the percentage would have been much more for Copilot, because in the corporate sector, and I don't know where they got this idea that Copilot is the most safe. I don't know who checked that. It's almost like somebody said, oh, Copilot is the most safe, and then everybody was like, yes, okay, Copilot is the most safe. I have some serious questions about how they came to that conclusion, but it's because it's part of the Microsoft ecosystem. So if you have a paid Microsoft suite that you're using, with all the tools, and then Copilot is integrated into Word, into Excel, into all of those things. But within the healthcare professional space, not a lot are using Copilot, don't even know what it is. Then there's Google Gemini, which is slowly growing now, because Google Gemini has really made a push to adopt their technology more, because they're in competition with ChatGPT. Canva, I think a lot more allied professionals, particularly OTs and speech therapists, are using Canva more and more now, because they can create resources, especially if they're in the pediatric field. So if they need to create like flashcards or posters or beautiful graphics, Canva AI has really improved by leaps and bounds. And actually, you can also now integrate Canva with tools like ChatGPT and Claude and create amazing things. Grammarly is something that some people use to, if they're not good with spelling and you're not good with grammar, it can be really useful. And then there's a few things that these were people that put as other. I've never heard of Emergent and Songer, and I think those were speech therapists. I don't know what those tools do, but there was one person who mentioned that. So that's just interesting to see a small pool of therapists consisting of OTs, physios, speech therapists in the Western Cape Education Department, and how they were using AI. So clearly AI is already in our professional spaces, in our personal spaces, but I want to widen the lens a little, because what if I told you that you've actually already been using AI for years and years and years, possibly decades, without even realizing it? So if you think about, for example, how many of you here have an Apple phone? And how many of you here use Siri? Siri is an AI tool. How many of you use Alexa or any of those things, right? So there are many tools, and I would say that since the 1980s, AI tools have been quietly making their way into our lives in the background, but it's always been a background tool. And the difference is that what's happening now is that it's become into the foreground. It used to just be this thing that happens and produces data. Now we are actually the ones inputting and asking AI things, and I think that's the fundamental shift that's happened. So we need to understand what exactly is AI. So let's deconstruct the term. If we first look at the term artificial, it simply means something made by humans rather than occurring naturally. And it is engineered, it is designed, it's constructed. So when we say artificial in AI, we mean systems that are human-made, not organic, not naturally occurring. It's not conscious. That's really important. There's no consciousness. And yes, there are these things going around about how they're trying to train AI with consciousness, etc. But it still has to come from a human being. And part of what we're going to talk about is from an ethics standpoint, is being aware that AI adopts the same biases that we as human beings have. So there's always, people promote AI as this computer tool that uses logic and reasoning, so it doesn't, have discrimination and prejudice and bias. But the data comes from human beings, so it inherits a lot of that thinking. So this is where it gets interesting, that in humans, intelligence is not problem solving. It includes learning from experience, whereas AI is purely a problem solving tool. And adapting in unpredictable environments. We heard Dr. Yasin speak about that, that poster he showed where AI is scalable, it's data-driven, whereas humans use context, we use reasoning, we take into account the unpredictable. So human intelligence is embodied, it's contextual, it's relational. A computer doesn't have lived experience. It only can make decisions based on the data that it is provided. So artificial intelligence refers to computer systems designed to perform tasks that would normally require human intelligence, such as learning, reasoning, interpreting language, recognizing patterns, and making decisions. It's a branch of computer science, statistics, and engineering that utilizes algorithms or models to perform tasks and exhibit behaviors such as learning, making decisions, and making predictions. This is the official definition by the HPCSA. So what I want to also look at is what is the difference between or comparing traditional versus AI-driven systems. Because now that you know what AI is, how do you tell the difference? So a traditional system has fixed rules. When you use it has a, if X happens, then do Y. So if you use a calculator and you put in 2 plus 2, it's going to give you 4 every single time. It's a fixed rule. So that's a traditional system. Whereas now if you use an AI type calculator and you say 2 plus 2 and you tell it a whole bunch of things, it might give you some philosophical answer. So that is the difference in how, also if you look at old GPS systems. I mean, I remember when I moved to Joburg and we had the old GPS, you put in your instructions and it gives you a direction and it only gives you that route. It doesn't take into consideration, oh, there was an accident, so it reroutes you. So if you look at now when we use Google Maps and Waze is AI driven, whereas your traditional old school GPS where you had to buy that little square screen and plug it into your computer, that was traditional. So that's how you can see one is very much linear, A plus B equals C, whereas the other one, it moves and it's dynamic and it takes into account changing variables and data all the time. So you have to look at then how data is handled and how decisions are made. Now, you also, I think this is something it's technical, but I think it's useful to know because we all hear like people talking about LLMs and generative versus assistive. So I think it's quite important to know what these are. So large language models is essentially a data system. So it takes, the simplest way to explain it is that it's like a super advanced predictive text-based system. So it's language-based. And so you know your phone sometimes, like when you have predictive text, as you're typing, I mean, I can't tell you, I have this friend, his name is Adli, and every time I type, and his wife is Wada, and every time I say Wada and Adli, it changes his name to Adele, because that's what it thinks I'm going to say. So I keep calling him Adele when his name is actually Adli. So that is predictive text. So it's using text and language and predicting what you should be knowing. So when you ask it a question, it predicts the most statistically likely sequence of words that would make sense as an answer. And ChatGPT is an example of a large language model. Then you have generative adversarial networks or GANs. These, and it sounds like a very big word, but all it actually means is that it's you think of it as two students in a room and they're competing with each other. So it's almost like arguing data against each other. And so then it produces the best result. So it's not predictive, it's more kind of trying to problem solve. Okay? Now, what is the role of data quality? So this is where it becomes interesting. Because it's predictive, it's really reliant on the quality of the data that you provide. So if you say, if you give the model poor data, it's going to produce poor results. I don't know where there's that expression where they say the quality of your answer depends on the quality of your question. If you don't ask the correct questions, you're not going to get quality answers. So what you have to take into account when you are feeding the models or asking AI is context. AI has no independent understanding of context or ethics, and that's what you heard Dr. Yasin spoke about as well. When it's saying to you that this is the best treatment method for this client, it doesn't take into account whether that client can access the clinic because they have to take like 10 taxis because they live so far away and it's expensive and it rains all the time. It doesn't know all of those things. So it cannot, whereas you as a human being can take context into consideration. Now, again, I want to stress this point. data is not neutral. It inherently inherits bias. There was actually an example of a study in the US they did where they were looking at data. The algorithm used healthcare spending as a proxy for health needs. So they basically looked at what was the health spending in a population to determine how they should allocate resources based on need. So what it didn't take into account is that the black population was spending less on that particular healthcare need, not because they didn't have the health need, but because they had less access financially, because that particular population was less well off than the white counterparts. And so can you see how the model then suggested that resource allocation to the populations must have greater resource allocation for the white population than the black population, not because it was racist, but because it thought that the need was greater. So it's a purely non-emotive decision it made, but it's completely biased by the data that doesn't take the context into consideration. So you have to understand how can bias be hidden in these objective facts. So let's look at then what the AI impact is in healthcare and rehabilitation. So first of all, we've got automated clinical documentation, which streamlines workflow and enhances accuracy. Now, I know GPs don't take a lot of clinical notes. I mean, you write in your notes, whatever, but as allied professionals, this is particularly a problem. Our notes can sometimes be 1-2 pages long. We have to give so much context and background. We have to do these soap notes, and it takes so much time. And so when you have AI that can enhance or speed up or make that efficient, it means you have more time to spend on what's actually important, which is spending time with your client. AI-assisted radiology enhances image clarity and diagnostic precision, and then drug discovery. So Dr. Yasin spoke extensively about that, and that's an example of how a tool like EM Guidance with digital scripting can use AI. Then, of course, we have rehabilitation, AI-augmented telepractice tools. I myself, in my private practice, I work with adults with ADHD. I see patients in person and online. And to have a telepractice where inside the system, the session can be transcribed. I can create my own templates for how I like my notes structured. And it can then convert the transcript based on what I want outputted into a template. So I don't have to spend hours typing up a clinical note. I still obviously have to check it, and we're going to get into some of how human in the loop comes into play, but it saves so much time because it takes quicker to edit a document than to start from scratch. Then hearing assessment support, there's big drives in digital technology and AI-assisted hearing assessment support. Motion tracking for physio, OT interventions. I don't know if he's here today, but there's a doctor I met who developed an app for preventative healthcare. There's no money for preventative healthcare. We're very reactive in healthcare. And he's developed this app that's very AI-driven, where it's more around prevention for longevity. So assessing what people's heart rates. Yesterday we had the sports medicine doctor who spoke about like different things you can look at. And so using AI tools for that can be very helpful. And then progress tracking dashboards. So where you input a whole lot of data into like an Excel sheet, and you have AI that automatically creates these beautiful graphs, so it makes it easier for you to quickly see and process and understand data than to have to understand it yourself. Okay, so here's the thing, right? As Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. So even though you have this powerful tool in your hands, at the end of the day, we are still ethically responsible for whatever outputs we put out into the world. So the question is, just because we can, should we? Beyond just the ethical responsibility as a health professional, even as a non-health professional, everybody who uses AI, there are things beyond healthcare that we need to think about from an ethical point of view. Environmental cost. AI data centers uses huge amounts of water. And there's big questions around what is the ethical responsibility of these companies in terms of how they are affecting the environment. Is it worth it when you just ask it, can you please give me a recipe for the best chocolate brownie, to be damaging the environment? And I'm guilty. I have a son who loves baking and he searches on AI all the time for recipes. But we just have to be mindful that, are we using it for every stupid thing? Like just use it where it's actually going to make an impact, right? So then there's the question of AI to children. We can't avoid it. If a child has a cell phone, they have access to AI. So what is our responsibility as the leaders of the next generation to, first of all, we've failed miserably in teaching digital health. Now we've still got AI on top of that. Are we teaching the next generation to be responsible in their AI use? Even within the health practice and rehabilitation, I often recommend AI tools to my clients. It really helps them in their lives. But I need to be mindful, if the child is a teenager or a young person, how am I sharing that? Is it ethically responsible to give them access to a specific tool? Then we've got plagiarism, copyright, and stealing from artists. There's been many lawsuits from musicians. You can now create your entire song using the voice of some favorite artist, and there's questions around how ethical is that, because you're stealing a likeness of someone else. Deepfakes and fake news. There's this one Instagram channel that I discovered years ago, where this was then already, where the whole channel looks like videos of Tom Cruise, but actually it's not him at all. It's a deepfake account. And he makes it clear, I'm not Tom Cruise, but every video looks exactly like him, and he's doing everyday things. So that's quite scary, because any picture you have of you, if you have a picture or a video publicly available, anybody can take that and make a likeness and make a video, and it can look so real. And then also, the thing that affects us as health professionals is AI as the new Dr. Google. So it used to be that your patients would come in and say, oh, I asked Google and this is what it said. I might have cancer, or I might have arthritis, or I might be dying. Like, this is what it says. And it almost trusts Dr. Google more. Now we don't have Dr. Google anymore. Now we have Dr. ChatGPT, because people are going there and talking about these symptoms. In mental health, it's also problematic, where people are now using AI as a therapist. Now, I don't think it's a completely bad thing, but the problem is that there's no oversight to that. And there's been some cases, I don't know if any of you have seen, where there were more than one teenager who was committed suicide, where they actually saw in their ChatGPT chat that the ChatGPT actually helped them with a plan, gave them instructions how to do it, all of those things. Because remember, a tool like ChatGPT, it's designed to be your biggest fan, like agree with you. It's designed to keep you on the platform. So it's very agreeable. And so if you go down a certain route, it's very dangerous, because it's going to keep taking you down that route. So what are some of the legal and regulatory standards we need to be aware of? So of course, as South Africans, we have the POPI Act. If you're in Europe, there's the GDPR Act. The Americans have to be aware of HIPAA. But protection of personal information then applies to AI as well, because are you putting people's personal information out there, and how secure is it on these platforms? And then there's the PIA Act that we also have to be aware of, and then the one that is specifically that we're talking about today is the Health Professionals Act, which governs the practice of health professionals, and this is where the HPCSA booklet then comes in. Then we also have our regulatory bodies like SAPRA and the Office of Healthcare Standards, and then of course the HPCSA. These are all regulatory bodies that govern how we practice in our day-to-day. So understanding safety, liability, and transparency is really important. We look at what these governing bodies are looking at is safety, liability, who is liable, and then the transparency of what our AI is being used for, when is it being used, and your patients need to be aware of that. There needs to be regular audits and assessments of AI systems. When I did that workshop the other day, I said to them at the beginning, by the end of the 6-hour workshop, most of what I would have said here would have been outdated. That's how quickly AI is changing. So it's so difficult to run a workshop where you're teaching somebody how to use a tool, because by the end of that workshop, then the tool already updated and changed everything. So like, how do you need to constantly keep up. And that in itself is time consuming for you as a health professional. That's not what you're trained to do. You're trained to work with patients. So this slide, so you'll see at the bottom there in the corner that says Notebooks LM. Now, I can already see when a slide was made in Notebooks LM. So there were a few slides that were presented yesterday. I was like, oh, that's from Notebooks LM. I can see. And certain slides, even in Dr. Yasin's presentation, I could see which of his images were AI generated, because I'm so used to working with it already. But there's certain things that AI always uses. So why I put this up was not so much for the information, because as I said, you can find it in the book. There's a difference between a slide. So if I go back to this one, that is using AI as an assistant for the design aspect, but then you going in and editing it and just clicking a button and taking it as it is. So this one, I put my script into an AI tool. I came up with my own research, my script, and I linked it to Canva, and I said, please produce my PowerPoint, right? And it came with like a slide, but then I could in Canva edit the words, change things, whatever. Whereas this one, I uploaded into Notebooks LM, the HPCSA booklet as is, and I said slideshow. One button, and it produced a whole slide deck. Just like that. I didn't do a single thing, right? And this is one of the slides that I took from that. Now, I didn't check it for spelling errors. I just put it in there. There could be, I think there was one or two that had like spelling errors. But that's just to show the difference in that I can't edit the slide. So if there's anything wrong in here, that's how it is. So this is also an AI-generated image. Now I clicked infographic. So it created an infographic that summarizes what the rules of AI is. So what is the HPCSA framework? So first of all, there are certain rules, in summary, that we can look at. The HPCSA established these specific guidelines because they recognize that health professionals are using AI all the time. So rule 1, you are the decision maker, always. Always, always, always. AI is just there to assist you. And so that's when we talk about AI being generative versus assistive. You are the one inputting the data. You are making the final decisions. The AI is purely there to assist you. One of the rules of thumb that I like to say is that I say to my therapist, I said, you have to ask yourself, what is your core clinical competency? Right? My core clinical competency as an occupational therapist is to have the clinical knowledge of a condition, to have clinical reasoning, to make decisions based on my knowledge and experience. Those are my core competencies. My core competency isn't whether I can make a nice PowerPoint, right? So when I use AI or to format a Word document, it's wasting my time. What my core clinical competency is to develop a patient treatment plan, but I can use AI to then generate a nicely formatted treatment plan in a Word document. I'm not asking AI to take over my clinical reasoning. I still have to provide that information. So you use it as an assistive tool. Clinical independence. You must maintain professional autonomy. That's, I think, what Dr. Yasin also drove home, is the autonomy that you have as a practitioner to make the final decision about patient care. You can use it to spin ideas off, because I always say there's two types of people. There's talker thinkers and thinker talkers. I'm a talker thinker, so if I need to problem solve something, I need to talk it out loud to someone. And so talking to an AI tool can be useful for just hearing your own thoughts. And so but you have to make the final decision. Patient-centered focus, the primary focus of the applications must be the patient's best interest and well-being. So you always have to, whatever the AI outputs, you always have to put through a lens of, is this what is for the best interest of the patient? Because we've all had those cases in healthcare where, on paper, this is the best treatment for this patient. But because again, contextually, relationally, you know that this is not the best for this patient. So we have to still follow our Hippocratic oath around beneficence, and is this for the best interest of the patient? Again, the ultimate accountability is held with you. So even if you are assisted by AI, at the end of the day, if anything goes wrong, you are responsible for whatever decision gets made or whatever gets put out there. The duty of disclosure. I think this one is so important because we all know everybody uses AI, but we all deny that we use AI, right? So we're almost like embarrassed to say, oh, I used AI, but we all know we're using AI. So it's important that you disclose when you are using AI. Even on social media now, they are becoming really strict for these influencers where even I have a YouTube channel, and when I upload a video, there is a tick box that you have to say, have you used any like alteration, or like basically implying have you used AI in any aspect of this video? And I have to say there, no, I have not. And if I have, and they find that there's AI in there, I can get into trouble. Influencers now, when they post on social media, have to indicate if they've used AI. So you have to disclose, and part of disclosure is in your patient process. So for example, the practice management tool that I use, in my agreement, I do state that, I'm using a tool that has AI integrated. But here's the thing. Disclosure and consent is a conversation and not a tick box. This is the mistake a lot of people make. They think that, oh, well, the person ticked there. I mean, how many of you have ticked I accept terms and conditions, and you haven't read even the first sentence on that thing? We all do it, right? So you can't also expect that if a patient signed that they've given consent. Did you actually have the conversation with them? So when I do record my sessions and it gets transcribed, I say at every session, I say just a reminder that this is recorded and it's transcribed, and my practice management tool does use AI to help me with my clinical notes. You okay with that? And they say yes, and then we proceed. Okay, so you do have to disclose what AI tools you are using. And then again, equity and bias mitigation. Again, be wary of the fact that AI is using data that gets fed to it, and data is inherently biased because human beings are feeding the data models. Okay, so essentially the core pillars of AI implementation is ethics, the legal aspects, and then the technical aspects of understanding the tools. So this is another slide that just looks at how HPCSA splits up the AI system, which is a support system, versus the practitioner being the authority, where the AI applies the context and empathy, judgment, clinical decision-making, and ultimately accountable for the treatment plan and diagnosis. What the AI is really good at is handling large amounts of data, summarizing all of that, predicting what could possibly happen, identify potential interactions, and you basically have to, you almost have to think of it as another tool to enhance your clinical reasoning. You still have to apply your own clinical reasoning, but now you just have a prettier kind of present that you can of data that you can make those decisions on. So this is an important concept that you need to keep in mind for everything. It's called the human in the loop, which is essentially that no AI must run without a human in the loop, whether it's at the beginning of the process or at the end of the process, there must be some final human approval. You almost have to think of it as if you have a team of designers and they design your website, etc., you still have to do the final sign-off. That's kind of what you have to think about it. So always check what is happening, so you have to look at what your data source is, what data source it's coming from, and what is your ethical oversight to how this data is being used. So here's the thing. One of the big things is that when you are using AI tools, how protected is the data that you are feeding it? I warn the therapists against this, is that you should not be going into ChatGPT and putting, even if you say, oh, I didn't put their name there. AI has access to so much information. They can easily, I think the research shows that, it says there, with as few as 3 data points, AI can identify a person if you give them the right data points. So you must be careful that you can't think that you're anonymizing data, that now it's confidential, because what data are you giving this AI? Okay, so you just need to be careful that be aware that there's no 100% guarantee that there's complete confidentiality. We live in an age of information. The new currency, they say, is information, right? And you can't trust these systems, because, especially these open source systems, because they still want the bottom line, and information is their currency. So just be careful whatever tool you're using. So a tool like EM Guidance, you can trust, because they've built it specifically for this purpose. But look into the terms and conditions, look into your practice management softwares, ask them if you're unsure, but always just be careful that you're not putting information in there that can identify the patient. So this is just a way that summarizes how you can make sure it's called the SAFER framework, where you look at the source transparency. Where is the information coming from? Can you trust that information? Is it reliable? Make sure you are accountable. How fair and culturally appropriate are the tools that you're using? Just like a lot of the assessment tools, like in psychology, etc., a lot of them are standardized on US-based populations, and then we do the tests on children here in South Africa, and I question some of them. I've seen many children when I used to work in a school for intellectual disability where I question whether this child has an intellectual disability. And when I look at the tests that were used, this child, like English is their second language, their parents don't speak a word of English, their parents are illiterate, they never had a pencil or a crayon, they've never seen that animal before, and now you're asking them in the test about this animal, because this is not normed on our children, and now they are seen as intellectually disabled. So you have to look in the same way at AI, is the data that is provided normed on our South African context? Okay, and that's why what Dr. Yasin spoke about localization, why that's so important. Exposure and privacy I spoke about, and then also make sure that AI is there it's not there to replace you, it's more there to support you. So I want to look at what are some of the practical AI applications. How much time do I have left? Okay. So quickly, like I mentioned, clinical notes, report writing, scheduling and admin, parent communication, data collection, and intake forms. So one of the things that I rely heavily on in my practice management software is that my clients get sent a form that they fill out on their device, and the fields are mapped. And so when I do a clinical note, it can automatically draw from all the information I've put in the safe closed system, because remember, it's a closed system, so it's not getting information from anywhere outside. So I can trust the data, it's my data. And I can then collect all of the information, and then it can pull that into my report. Therapy resource generation. So like I said, if I've used it before, where let's say I want to create a visual schedule for a teenager or a tween that needs to follow a visual schedule so they can keep track of what they need to do. I'm not going to spend hours in Canva designing stuff. That's not my core competency. But I can go into a tool like Claude and say, this is what I want to create. These are the headings. These are the colors. These are the characters this child likes. Connect it to Canva and say, please generate a visual schedule. And then it will open it up in Canva, and Bob's your uncle can download it. So I didn't provide any confidential data, and I could create a resource. And digital scripting was the one that we spoke about. I'm going to skip over this. So clear thing is the pyramid of what we use AI for. It should not be used for clinical judgment. That's for you. Or clinical reasoning and planning. Admin and formatting. A for away. Go for it. Okay. And then I just wanted to end off with this case example. So this is an example of what I was saying. I'm not good at formatting Word documents, right? But I had a client who had functional neurological disorder. So I didn't provide anything that this can be any person. It can be any fictitious case study. Now, the key thing is I didn't ask the AI to generate a treatment plan for me. what I did was I myself, after having done the assessments, determined like what I feel the key treatment elements need to be, who the multidisciplinary team needs to be, what I feel my treatment. I basically dictated all of that into the AI, and I said, I want you to format this into an occupational therapy treatment plan, and I want you to provide me with some evidence-based, because I like to be an evidence-based therapist. I don't like to just imagine things out of my head. Please, can you source for me some research articles that shows evidence for why I'm recommending certain treatment protocols, right? And so it actually did that. So this is an example of how it used my assessment tools that I said, these are the ones I'm using. Are there any that I'm missing? These are things that I said I'm going to be doing, sensory environment mapping, all of those things. And then it gave me these references. But now I need to go and check each of those references, because AI can hallucinate and make up its own things to please you. So now my job is to go and copy each of those things and go into Google Scholar and look for that paper and see if it's a legitimate research and see what does the actual research say. But it saves me time from having to now go look for the papers. It just shortens that research window. So this is an example of how you can use AI in an effective way to just make you more effective and efficient. Okay, so the main thing is you want to build confidence by just starting small with small things and slowly building, and use tools that you can trust. And as a reflection, this is one of what the HPCSA says. Ignorance of the tool's mechanics is not a defense. The modern practitioner must maintain the requisite skill to provide competent, safe care alongside AI. You cannot say, I'm not interested in AI, I'm not technologically savvy. It is here. It's going to be part of your life, whether you actively use it or not. So one of your ethical responsibilities is you must actually learn about AI. So that's the last thought that I want to leave you with. Okay. If you are interested in anything to do with how private practice, growing your private practice, or legal aspects, or anything like that, I have a YouTube channel called Private Practice Growth Club, which you can subscribe to, freely available information, so do go and check that out. Okay, I don't know if we have time for questions.
We've got time for one question. Who's got a burning question? Okay, I've got a question which follows on from the previous talk as well, and that where is the malpractice insurance and the cybersecurity insurance sitting on the conversation with AI? I'm expecting it to lag behind a little bit when the complaints start happening. Do you foresee that at some point they're going to say, do you use AI? Yes, surcharge.
I'm not sure. I think that is, I'm sure it is lagging behind, because usually how insurance works is that, they also base it on algorithms. Actuaries do the work of identifying where the biggest risks are. They look at risk profile, and that's how they, create their plans or their policies, etc. But I think that currently, as it stands, what will most likely happen is that it will be covered under anything to do with digital and POPI and PIA, and that's why I brought those regulations up, because it's going to, and the malpractice side, it's got nothing to do with AI. It's still going to be your responsibility. So it's more from the cyber side, it's the technology use and POPI and how protected is the data. But from the clinical side, the malpractice side is more just, you made that decision. You gave the patient that. It's your responsibility.
Cool. Thank you, Tasneem.
Okay.
We've got a small gift for you that I'll give you just a little bit later,
No
and
problem.
appreciate you being here and organizing it. Let's give her a round of applause.